evening. So the question is, has that Mindanao exist? And like the sound of music, let's start from the very beginning. What is theirs? And these are the statistics I found. May gamay variation from what Carol presented, but essentially these are the of the percentage of votes that you'll find in Mindanao, division in terms of provinces. And two things you will notice. One is that settler society communities dominate, which means then this will be, if you're going to run for office, these are the kinds of provinces you'll be aiming for. But the other interesting thing, however, is that war zones also tend to be very important. So ang gibuhat na ko, what I did is to break it down into regions, and you have this. Okay. Zamboanga, Davao areas, sector zones, high percentage. But then if you remove all of this, actually ARMM can compete with the rest. So the puzzle then that you want to ask is, well, given we can understand why settlers communities would have a higher percentage of votes, but how does one explain this? Especially if the standard explanation is the Moros are disappearing because of government repression and settler domination. If you add that more, then there's one more. So that's the first thing I think I'd like you guys to, I like us to consider. Some of these questions I don't have a definitive answer. I'm just showing you some observations. The third thing that's really interesting is this. Okay, so this is a quick statistic. You can get it from the COMELEC, and these are the regions, the Mindanao regions that are worth adding. If you add them all, 23.05, that can actually compete with this one. Okay, so in a certain sense, the potential for Mindanao to be, a deciding, an area that will decide national elections is there. Okay, and you're not even talking, and it's both Christian settler zones and Moro. Okay. Now, if you add that further division, okay, the further division is, as Carol pointed out, this is the distinction between the number of voters. Okay. Now, Mindanao is small compared to Luzon, Cebu is highest, but if you do this, and this is my suggestion tonight, that there is indeed no Mindanao vote, but there is a Visayan vote, and that Visayan vote fluctuates through time. Okay. And the simple reason for that is that while we Mindanaoans do not like Imperial Manila, we actually have this igagaw relationship with Central and Eastern Visayas. Yes. And it's something to do with the fact that a lot of us those of us in the settler zones, come from this part. So it is, I think, and I will show it to you. I mean, if you break it down further, maoni ang mugawas. Okay. Note, for example, in today's division of jurisdictions, cities, categories, this is actually, I have no data from 46 to 60s, but if you notice, if you add this to this, gamay na lang kaayo ang leading points of the non-Visayan areas. Okay. So the question you have to ask then is, how did this come to be? And as Carol pointed out, something to do with the fact after 1946 up to 65, over 1 million people moved from the Visayas and partly locals, but mainly from the Visayas to Mindanao, and basically reshaped the island, okay, the composition of the island. But so as some research, as early as late as 1964, 1960, earliest 1962, Mindanao already was a source of votes. And that's how you could understand why somebody like Alejandro Almendras, out of the blue, former guerrilla, from Cebu, from Danao, then moving to Davao, suddenly becomes an important kingmaker. Not Julio Osames, but Alejandro Almendraz. Not Rosalie Lim or Pelaez, but Alejandro Almendraz. Okay. So this is now the stage. And I would like to suggest is, thank you very much, Wikipedia, for mapping our elections since 1946. What you will notice here is this. Look at this grid. There is no solid south, north. Carol is right. But this grid actually fluctuates, but is always determinant in who wins. And here, Garcia, because he's from Bujol, and a lot of Boholanos are in Mindanao, gets solid, but Macapagal is able to control that. Manahan was not able to control the center, much of the rest of the archipelago. That's why Garcia won. Okay. So this is quite interesting to notice kasi kay dili lang ni, this is not always solid. Because if you go into the 65 elections, Macapagal wins in this grid because of Pelaez. Again, look at the grid. Marcos, though, thank you, Almendraz. I think the plazas, Marcos wins this side. And then 69 completely changes it all. Osmeña, taga Cebu, wins small. They said Marcos cheated, fine. But look at how Marcos basically destroys Osmeña in time in the assumption, of course, that people voted and Marcos did not have money, the treasury and the reserves that Marcos looted was not enough to get people to convince to vote for him. But look at this. Now, under Cory, Wikipedia, thank you, has the same thing. Okay. Marcos wins here. Marcos, Marojas here. And then it becomes more disjointed because after Cory decentralized everything, then the ball game completely changed. Diba? But again, note how Ramos won. Okay. Mitra won Davao, but again, this grid is really important to consider. In 1998, this is very much more quirky kasi kay Erap won this part. But again, if you look at how Serge Osmeña? This was important. So this is probably the area a time when this kind of grid wasn't working that well. But if you notice, settler zones lang yapon. Let me go back here. Look, no solid north. Okay. So the idea of a solid north is kind of strange and weird. And in 2004, you have the same thing. No solid north, but Iligan City, Visayan-oriented, Arroyo. Hildy Arroyo in Iligan City where she grew up, but she made up for it with this. Again, you have that connection that kept, Mindanao, this part, the Visayan block Visayan vote is actually quite interesting to consider. Noy went here. Hirap actually controls this. It's very fascinating because I have no explanation for this. But, temporary. And then you have Digong and you have this. No solid north. No. Okay. But here you have the 30 winning. So sa atong discussion in our Q&A, maybe some of you can figure out what happened to this trend. And to just add more, this is how Duterte won, and I think all of you are familiar with it. Rojas about what? The 16-point lead. But if you break it down, and this is really what is interesting in Mindanao. Okay. The only time Rojas won, as Carol pointed out, okay, Kamay kayo yung lead, with the exception of Camigan, but Camigan is small. Okay, look at that. So Duterte, well, meaning in a certain way, if somebody, one of the candidates is able to gain the support of Mindanaoans, the way Duterte was able to do that, this is the kind of voting percentage of votes that he or she will get. If you break it down further, in terms of cities, same. Okay. And note that none of these guys won in any of the cities, despite the fact that, say, in the province level, there were some provinces that Rojas won. Again, look at the big chunk of the percentage. What exactly does this mean? Well, if you're a candidate, then you have to devise a strategy to keep, try to sustain or replicate what Digong had done. Okay. Again, but then what I did actually is, if you add Cebu in the same, if you look at the Visayas vote, this is the Mindanao cities vote. You look at the Visayas vote, it's almost the same kind of percentage that's in operation, with the exception of Leyte. But look at the kind of edge that Turkey has over opponents. Compare that to Mindanao, and you really have a potential Visayan bloc that needs to be tapped by any candidate who wants to win. Okay, so paspasan nato. Now Mindanao, of course, has this basic problem. One is, as Carol pointed out, the birds and the bees will vote on election day. The classic slogan of the late Congressman Ali de Maporo. We have this reputation as the worst election process. I found this memo in 2019. Imagine the entire island of Mindanao, larger than the country of Poland, is declared a hotspot. This is always this notorious thing about Mindanao. But it's actually much more complicated now because, to add one more is that these are some of the towns that people usually cite as source of the guns and the golds. Example nito, and the statistical probability is really like impossible to happen. But these are the towns that when people write about Mindanao's hot spots from Manila, they always mention this. And nobody actually asks how many people there are and what percentage of the island these towns consist of. But that is what is the image, that is complicating image of Mindanao that we see. Now, the reason, of course, is we are now becoming increasingly a country of clans. Rappler, actually, I got this from Rappler. If you notice the change, it's really intense. Although the high level of clans is happening in the north. But look at Mindanao in 2004 and Mindanao now in 2013, you will really see the vast difference. And Carol pointed out, all these families are taking over. All the old families are in fact more entrenched. So that's one of the side of it. And this has two implications. One, of course, is 2004, di ba? The famous 1 million votes that Gloria Arroyo got, courtesy of ARMM. Okay. So on the one hand, it's still guns, goods, and gold that decides, votes. But this is a very interesting implication because, as I'll mention, it's a conclusion. But that is not the other thing. The other thing that's interesting about Mindanao is this. Yeah. People are unchallenged, but political families are unchallenged. But damn it, people vote for them. And why is that? Is it because they're satisfied? Is it because they're paid well? Is it what is the reason why the more families are entrenched in places like Davao Oriental, Occidental, Compostela, the more people will vote? And I have a particular possible explanation to this. But to add more, one of the other interesting things is it may be possible that the Apatuan era resolving electoral conflict has been replaced by a more stable way because of this. Okay. Yung isang article ng isang Filipino-American, si John Linantod, and he was tracking the number of killings related to electoral violence nationwide. No? And you will notice, grabe ang decline. Which means couple of things. We could suggest that political families, instead of killing each other, like the Apatuan Sinto Banganda have decided to find a way in which they can live and let live. And like, old Southeast Asians, they intermarry, but they also divide provinces. And so electoral violence may not be a factor in these coming elections, because if you notice where the violence are in Mindanao, 29% lang. We have actually unknown is, criminals, blah, blah, blah. But 29% is the lowest. Si Sol Iglesias, a professor sa UP, finished her PhD, and she tracked the kinds of political violence that have been happening in all parts of the country, and this is what she found out in Mindanao. So most likely then, then the other side of it is, of course, Pancho Lara and international alert. They said, well, if Mindanao is violent, where is the violence coming from? Well, no, not yet. So wait. So if that is not happening, why is it that political violence related to politics has gone down? One possible reason is that even if Mindanaoans still remain poor, we've been growing compared to Visayas. In a certain way, while Manila is still the imperial capital, you will notice that things have actually changed. If you go back 20, it's gone down. Okay. But if you look at this, where is it there? There's no drop, no big drop, but it's actually been flowing. So that's probably a possible explanation, a steady. Yes, we are in a crisis, but the way a crisis impacts regions is that it's not regions collapsing like what happened in Thailand, or or cities collapsing, but islands, big islands like Mindanao, it's really flooding through economic development. Okay. So while poverty incidence is high in ARMM, you actually have in these two places a decline also. So there is a contradiction that's happening that you can actually relate to the provinces with the highest percentage of votes. Okay. Now, paspasan na lang nako ni. So if there is less conflict, if there is no major crisis, if people's lives are steady, income might go down but still steady, and political families have found a way to settle differences other than killing each other, and what is happening in a way? Well, increasingly, I think in the elections, the coming elections, vote buying will be the norm. So I asked my friends, diba, taga-Osamis man ko, tagpila ang dollar ni kay I was presenting this in a presentation here. They're not good at converting to peso. Kaya dollar, sorry kayo. But in Osamis City, this is supposedly the estimate, what $5,000, 5,000 pesos ang estimate of vote buying. Cotabato, the same thing, Marawi. And what is interesting, that you will notice that with the exception of Bongao, okay, and Iligan, very consistent ang price of the votes. That this is like five months ago, okay? Basig nagbago na because of what's happening on top. Maybe the value of votes have gone up. But this is something really interesting to consider. Now, you ask yourself, why is it that Osami City voters of Osami City can sell their vote for the amount of $5,000, 5,000 pesos in the same way as Cotabato and Marawi, and you also have an increase here. So I think money matters now in the coming elections. So the interesting thing is to look at a couple of things. One, where is the money coming from? Second, how is it that incumbent officials running for office, what sources of money have they tapped other than family wealth? One of the things that maybe investigate journalists in Mindanao can follow is the state of infrastructure funds, the state of development aid that is being implemented at the local level. What stage are they in? Are they being postponed? If you have international aid, what happens is you have to have a counterpart fund. World Bank, Asian ADB, even the Europeans say, okay, we'll give you money, dapat may counterpart fund. What has happened is that counterpart fund working together with the international fund to implement these infrastructure programs, or have all these infrastructure programs been postponed? And my suspicion is everything has been postponed. There is a law, of course, that says you cannot do anything related to development projects if it affects politics. But I think even before that gap, that moratorium is implemented, something has changed. So that's probably. So if you follow the book that Pancho Lara wrote on insurgents and clans that published Ateneo, almost always the source of fund would come from development aid, but the other source of fund would probably come from here. And this was what I mentioned earlier. If you will notice, conflict over the shadow economy has become gradually increased through the years. Something to do with not so much interdiction or prevention. All of us know that at the local level, police and smugglers are in cahoots. It might be about turf. And think about my dear Osamis Mayor, the late Mayor Aldong Parohinog from my hometown of Osamis, suddenly disappearing and losing his 30-year of power. And this is probably turf war, but it's also probably a turf war based on how much resources are necessary to win an election. So interesting kayong to look at these campaigns, when the usual conflict between clans are not fought, anymore over elections, but but clans have sought to make peace with each other, fight over elections, but then deal with the question of funding and where the funding is coming from. And so in a presentation in his ISWE Center, they said, well, is it terrorism that happened in 27? And I was trying to figure out based on news clippings, etc., to create this map. Now, I don't know if you guys agree, no? But this is the map I came out with Marawi 2017. Mura sila Kevin Bacon, diba? 7,000-8,000 degrees of separation. And you'll notice, barkada tadan. Everybody knows each other. Barag, tambay. We all namahaw lang sa tambayan sa merkado. And everybody is related to each other. Yeah? And I was trying to explain it here that you cannot say black and white that in Marawi, what happened in Marawi is about terrorism, because if you look at who's related with one another, Jesus Maria Joseph, it's more than that. Even goes up to as far as the Quijano clan allegedly in Cagayan de Oro, which is allegedly connected to cardappers in LA. So this kind of illicit economy, actually, sila Pancho Lara and Vicky De La Rosa are just starting this research. Fascinating. And that this is Mindanao. This is all, probably the source of the next source of income. Of course, these guys are eliminated, but we really don't know. Okay. Kasi, etc. Okay. So, question then, let me close, is what are the hopes? I don't know the hopes, but I think si Carol mentioned that the young people have a big role to play here. Hopefully, the young people will take over. Okay, mora na. Thank you. Daghang kayong salamat.
Thank you.